Hey guys, welcome back. So I want to tackle a very important issue that was mentioned a few times over this past year, but completely crossed the line during yesterday's Independence Day parade in Kiev. Now, feel free to hate me for this one, but during Ukrainian President Poroshenko's speech, for about 9 minutes, he talks, or in my opinion, attacks, the Orthodox Church. So let's go over the details one by one, along with far historical events, and learning from history so that we won't let another religious split that could cause a war on the mainland of Ukraine happen. After all, in America, we're taught in school that this country was founded on the principle of separation of state and church, that governments shouldn't meddle in religious affairs, and I will explain all the dangers it poses because of Poroshenko's very intense Ukrainianization process. Let's start with an event that happened on July 27th, 2018. Here is a small event note by Radio Free Europe, which, a brief fact about RFERL, it was actually made by the United States federal government to broadcast to the Warsaw Pact countries during the Cold War, and today it remains a US federally funded media outlet. So for those of you who were asking, no, it's not a pro-Russian source. So moving on, July 27th was the 1030th year anniversary of the Christianization of the Kievan Rus in 988 AD. And thus, a proper for a religion held a ceremony marking the anniversary. The only problem was that the head of the Orthodox Church is in Russia, just like the Roman Catholicism is in, well, Rome. Well, to be more precise, it's in the Vatican City, which is inside of Rome, but independent of Rome and Italy. So a lot of the times, Christian churches are called Russian Orthodox churches. So with that, let's read the paragraph in this event post. Tens of thousands of followers of the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine held a cross-bearing procession in Kiev. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, which led the annual march on July 27th, says it wants to promote Ukraine's ties with Russia. The event was held under tight security following previous threats of violence from Ukrainian nationalist groups who support the rival Kiev-based Orthodox Patriarchate. They see the procession as a provocation by Moscow. Another procession will be held on July 28th by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kievan Patriarchate, which says it wants to promote Ukrainian national unity. Both events mark the conversion of Kievan Rus, the forerunner of modern Ukraine and Russia, to Christianity. The footage on this webpage actually disturbingly shows a nationalist yelling glory to Ukraine and towards the end yells death to Moscovites, while being arrested because he probably wanted to beat up some Russians, since a lot of Russians and Belarusians come to Kiev for this ceremony.
Ми не провокуємо, ми знімаємо сюжет. Нам же треба добре буде можемо говорити. Почекайте, в чому проблема? Почекайте, в чому проблема? Ми знімаємо ефір, ми що нормально можемо заберіть від мене руки, в чому проблема? Я що не можу коментувати? Що це таке? Що це таке? Слава Україні! Слава Україні! Слава Україні! Що ти, слава Україні, чи що?
Давайте в автобус.
Справа? Я не зрозумів, чому я не можу говорити слава Україні в Україні?
Маєте право,
сьогодні я не маю права
Ми просимо тільки не
сказати це, чи що? Що я такого зробив?
Не
Що я такого зробив? Я не знаю. В чому справа? Я не розумію, чому обмежують мої права? Що я такого зробив? Чому обмежують мої права? Що таке? Що таке, хлопці? Що значить? Так дайте мені зайти, ви ж мене тримаєте.
Та все. Заспокійтесь, шановні.
Слава Україні! Геть москалів! Геть москалів! Геть москалів! Прижміть!
Оргкомитет, пожалуйста, право-влево.
I mean, they did beat up old senior citizens that were celebrating the foundation of Kiev, but the crimes of nationalism is to be saved for another video. After this, the very next day, Ukraine, in protest to Russia's church, which is actually a Ukrainian church but under a Moscow Patriarchate, held its own Patriarchate ceremony. So first, Ukraine changes the anniversary day of Victory Day over Nazi Germany from May 9th to May 8th. And now changes the anniversary day of Orthodox foundation of the entire Rus region from July 27th to July 28th, all because those dates stink of Russian. He went on to say that the Russian church is a threat to national security of Ukraine. This made headlines in a lot of Western articles. Here is just one of the articles from LA Times. President Poroshenko says things such as, "This obliges us to act," and "I believe it is absolutely necessary to cut off all the tentacles with which the aggressor country operates inside the body of our state." He also said in his independence speech that the Russian church is affiliated with the Russian hybrid warfare against Ukraine. The article goes on to say that the separation from state is only written on paper, and that the Russian church supports the Russian aggression. Yet the next paragraph says that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church supported the Maidan event, which led to the fall of the Ukrainian government in 2014, which is actually 2013. The reason they wrote 2014 is because the, quote, Russian aggressor came in 2014, after the Maidan protests and the government coup. So I could ask which church started taking sides first, based on what I've just said, but a better question would be why? I ask why because here's a clip from 10 years ago on the 1020th anniversary ceremony, back when there was only one day for the ceremony instead of a split into two.
Россия, Украина, Беларусь – это есть Святая Русь.
Here's actually the whole segment of the report from the Russian media Vesti, and then we're going to compare it to a Ukrainian media from Hromadsky.
Празднования Дня Крещения Руси пройдут на всей канонической территории Русской Православной Церкви. Об этом сегодня рассказал патриарх Московский и всея Руси Кирилл. Он отметил, что событие, которое произошло 1030 лет назад, заложило глубокую традицию, в рамках которой развивалась национальная жизнь и культура всех народов, которые связаны Владимировым крещением. Дмитрий Каестро продолжит.
Колокольный перезвон во всех православных храмах одновременно зазвучит в субботний полдень. Соборную площадь в самом сердце страны и ее древней столицы уже готовят к великому торжеству. Здесь, среди золота куполов и древних храмовых стен, пройдет центральное событие празднования 1030-летия крещения Руси. Патриарх Кирилл отслужит божественную литургию прямо под открытым небом.
Для нас, людей веры, людей церкви, это событие в первую очередь связано с тем, что свет Христов пришел на нашу землю. И евангельское послание, прикоснувшись к сердцам и умам наших людей, преобразовало души наших предков и заложило глубочайшую духовную традицию. Пусть Господь хранит Отечество наше, всю историческую Русь, все братские народы, вышедшие из Киевской купели крещения. Мы торжественно, по милости Божией, отпразднуем этот день в городе Москве. Торжественные богослужения будут состояться и в Киеве, матери городов русских, где произошло крещение.
В столице на праздник ждут представителей многих поместных церквей. Историческое и духовное пространство Русской Православной Церкви шире политических границ. Поэтому и охват торжеств грандиозен. Они пройдут на всей канонической территории Русской Церкви, церкви многих народов, наследников исторической Руси, в том числе и украинцев. Так в минувшие годы проходил всеукраинский крестный ход. В 2016-м по Киеву прошли 80 тысяч человек со всей страны. Не потерявшие памяти на Украине, чтобы не говорили таких много, не забывают и слова, прозвучавшие на Майдане в дни 1020-летия крещения Руси.
Россия, Украина, Беларусь – это есть Святая Русь.
Предстоящий праздник – демонстрация духовного единства православных верующих не только России и Украины. К торжествам готовится в Донбассе, Белоруссии, Приднестровье, Молдавии. Однако на Украине местные власти и спецслужбы пытаются помешать верующим попасть в Киев на крестный ход. Транспортные компании отказываются сдавать в аренду автобусы для рейсов на нужную дату. Такая ситуация в Ровно, Херсоне, Черкасах, Сумах. Тревожные сообщения приходят из Одесской епархии, где местные власти стараются не допустить участия в шествии прихожан.
Верующие Украинской Православной Церкви обязательно прибудут в Киев. Никакие препятствия, как в этом, так и в предыдущие годы, не смогли остановить наших верующих в том, чтобы они получили духовную поддержку и приняли участие в молитве за мир и благословение нашей Родины, нашего народа.
Молебен на Владимирской горке в Киеве пройдет уже в пятницу, 27 июля. Ожидается, что после него в крестном ходе примут участие более 100 тысяч священнослужителей и прихожан православной церкви. Дмитрий Кайстер, Максим Щепилов, Арина Третьякова, Вести.
And here's a full segment from the Ukrainian media Hromadski, which shows the event from both days.
To celebrate the 1030th anniversary of the Christianization of the Kievan Rus, an array of events took place on July 27th to 28th. As has become a tradition over the years, the two main Orthodox churches in Ukraine, that of the Moscow Patriarchate and the Kiev Patriarchate, conducted services and the processions on separate days to mark the occasion. July 27 was the Moscow's Patriarchate celebration day, while Kiev's took place on July 28th.
We've been participating in sacred processions for many years. Today is the first day we have done so in celebration of Volodymyr the Great.
Before the procession started, some of the Moscow Patriarchate believers complained about the struggle they faced coming into Kiev. They said that their bus was stopped in the capital on the suspicion that there was a bomb inside.
Почти 3,5 часа. 3 години.
А що сказали, що ваш автобус замінований?
Замінований, да.
Ну, а потім відпустили?
Відпустили. Ми з Божою допомогою приїхали сюди, до Києва. Ми вже почали в них проситися.
But most people assured us that they had entered the city without any problems. The majority of the churchgoers arrived in buses, which they were provided by their churches. Many came by their own means of transport.
I was meant to go by train, but there weren't many tickets left, since so many people wanted to attend the procession. So we went by car. Someone offered to drive me. I returned my ticket and went with my friends from church. We got here, thank God. Everything is cool. We're very happy.
As has become tradition, the procession started on St. Vladimir Hill and finished by the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra. But this year was special, as Ukrainians are waiting for a tomos of autocephaly, a decree that will create a single local church. Priests from the Moscow Patriarchate avoided questions on autocephaly.
If a person is sick, we go to the doctors, right? So if there are church-related questions, they should go to priests who are qualified on the matter and can solve this particular question.
What's your opinion on the idea about the unified Orthodox Church?
My opinion is in line with the entire church leadership and the entire Ukrainian population.
The believers themselves are split on the matter.
Jesus said there is no such thing as a Jew or a Roman. There isn't anyone. We're all one people. It makes no difference.
I have negative thoughts on all of this because our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents and now us are all here taking part in the procession. Is it not unified yet?
Well, there's another church that will carry out its own procession tomorrow.
No, we're not interested in that.
Unlike Moscow Patriarchate believers, the Kiev Patriarchate believers say that they came to the streets to support the unified Orthodox Church.
In my opinion, events of a political nature are taking place in our country, and this procession, I think, is no longer just religious, but political or even geopolitical. If Ukraine manages to break away from the Moscow Patriarchate and from Moscow itself, I think that the further we are from Moscow in any area, the more independent we are.
We came by bus. Our Kherson diocese provided us with a bus, so we came to this march in support of the unified Orthodox Church in Ukraine.
Unlike Moscow Patriarchate believers, the Kiev Patriarchate believers say that they came to the streets to support the unified Orthodox Church. The President of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, also took part in the procession, along with his wife Marina. This caused a delay at the beginning of the march, and people weren't allowed through the gates for a long time. According to the police, 25,000 people took part in Moscow Patriarchal's march, while 65,000 people took part in Kiev's. But the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate does not believe the numbers and say that 200,000 people attended.
I could not find the 200,000 attendees claim anywhere. That could just be something Hromadsky threw in there. But the point is, on the July 28th event, you can barely see any religious icons. You just see a lot of Ukrainian flags, which symbolizes that this is more of a political stance rather than the purpose of a religious stance. So, I also ask why, because the problem could lead to history repeating itself. Let me explain. When Rome split into the Eastern and Western Roman empires, Rome and Constantinople, otherwise known as the Byzantine Empire, in the year 1054 AD began what was called the Great Schism. Orthodox Christianity and Roman Catholicism have had their splits before, but the event of 1054 AD was the permanent one that led to not only a permanent split between the two religions, but has had a huge impact on current and future military campaigns of that time, including the Crusades. It separated the popes, Roman citizens, the empires, which thus had their share of civil unrest and persecutions. And the same is already happening today with nationalists wanting to target Russian Orthodox Christians, viewing it as an occupational event instead of a common annual religious holiday that has been going on for centuries. Going back to the Independence Day parade speech by President Poroshenko, he said that Ukraine's 1,000-year history of Christianity needs to be defended from Russia. To back this statement, LA Times included a paragraph about this religious dispute, including the name Prince Vladimir of Kiev of 988 AD, making Christianity possible in Kiev through the Kievan Rus. However, it seems that history over this time has been lost to these people because both the article and the president don't mention the fact that Prince Vladimir of Kiev was also the Prince of Novgorod, which would be where 300 years later the Kievan Rus changed its capital to Novgorod, and thus Russia was born. Although a fun fact is that the capital of the Rus people in 862 AD was actually Novgorod, moved to Kiev 20 years later in 882 AD to be moved back to Novgorod 300 years later. The term Ukrainian, or anything similar of the sort, also didn't exist in that time, which is one of the many reasons that both Russia and Ukraine believe their heritage started from the Kievan Rus in 882 AD, which is true, but the perspective difference they have is that Russia says Russian culture started from the Kievan Rus, while Ukrainians say Ukrainian culture began from it. The historically accurate way of saying it would be that the Rus people have migrated to the place that they would call Kievan, since Kievan Rus defines into Kiev of the Rus people, and the people back then by the Romans and the Byzantines were known as the Ruthenians. Just the point that I am trying to make is that creating what Poroshenko calls the unified Orthodox Church would actually be far from unified. The first reasons are the ones I have mentioned earlier, a further split between the Orthodox religion. What would also come is a further split amongst Ukrainian people in the long run, because more than half of Western Ukrainians, which are mostly affiliated with nationalism, are actually Catholics, because their region comes from Poland, and that's the majority religion of Poland. And then would come the fear for the people that attended their churches for decades would suddenly have to switch churches as well to avoid being called pro-Russian traitors of Ukraine, because their church, if under a Russian patriarch instead of a Ukrainian one, would lead to consequences for those individuals. As a last fact, I'd like to point out that Patriarch Bartholomov of Constantinople, sorry for mispronouncing his name, his status could be considered that of the Pope for the Roman Catholicism, is against recognizing the unified Church of Ukraine idea by President Poroshenko. Without getting too much into detail, he recognizes what's called the Unified Churches of Ukraine. Onufry is the current head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but it displeases Poroshenko because Onufry answers to the Grand Moscow Patriarch Kirill instead of Ukraine's brand new patriarch system, and is displeased that the centuries-old Constantinople, the 270th patriarch, won't recognize it. But again, that's because these patriarchs, Moscow, Constantinople, they don't mix state and religion. It appears that only the Ukrainian patriarchs are political, and that undermines the entire fundamental of freedom of religion. They already have Ukrainian patriarchs. They don't need to break hundreds of years of tradition because of Poroshenko's paranoia of the Russian Church being a party of Russia's hybrid warfare. If I ever see large crates of RPGs and ammunition being delivered by the Russian Church to the separatists, then that would be a very different story. But as of the story of right now, it's only going to lead to further persecution of anyone having anything to do with Russia, even religious-wise, even if that person may or may not even be aware of their church's roots of command structure. Meaning, if a Ukrainian is going to want to pray for his loved ones and accidentally enters a church that happens to be controlled by a Russian patriarch, then that person is probably going to get beat up by nationalists. Anyways, in my next video, I'm going to be linking my new Discord server so that people can have discussions about these kind of topics. I will be in the server, of course, as well. I have quite a few videos nearly completed for you guys, one of them having to do with Russia's Army 2018 Military Forum Expo. So please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell to keep updated with my latest content, and here is Poroshenko's religion segment of the speech during his Independence Day.
US dollars. This is the way how we're getting energy independence. Fourth, and what I would like to emphasize, the body cannot be free when the soul is captive. And let us hear today in Constantinople, in Moscow, and the Vatican. We have a firm intention to cut off the last node which the empire is using for its desperate tries to bind us. We're determined to put an end to the unnatural and non-canonical presence of a significant part of our Orthodox community that depends on the Russian Church that sanctifies Putin's hybrid war. The Church that day and night prays for the Russian authorities and for the army, also Russian. Christening came to us from the Constantinople Mother Church, and it was spread to the vast expanses of Eastern Europe from Kiev. Ukrainian Christianity has more than 1,000-year-long history, its own theological, liturgical and church tradition, and now that we restored and defended the state independence of Ukraine, with the capital here in Kiev, there is no reason why among the other local Orthodox churches there shouldn't be equal Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The question of Thomas on autocephaly for the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. The church leaders and the public are clapping the president. The question of Thomas on autocephaly for the Orthodox Church goes far beyond their religion. It is from the same rod that the strengthening of the army, that the protection of the language, that the struggle for membership in the European Union and joining NATO. This is another strategic benchmark in our historic way. This is a significant component of our independence, and integration into the European and Euro-Atlantic space is a reliable way to ensure the security development of Ukraine decent living conditions for people. Such integration is 100% guarantee of our independence.